Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Pictures on My Mind, and this is going to be a multiple part episode. It's something I'm quite knowledgeable about because I've done it for over 20 years, and that's protest photography. Okay, and I think for me as like a fledgling photojournalist, documentary photographer, I'd done a fair bit of street photography, but it was only when I started engaging in protest photography did sort of the levels start to change. It got a little bit more intense, a little bit more interesting. It affected me on an emotional level personally because I was having to deal with these kind of emotions in this quite a potentially stressful and sometimes dangerous environment. And I think it's a great bridging and stepping stone for any kind of photojournalist who kind of wants to kind of up their skills and see how they might react in difficult situations. I think a lot of young photographers, I myself included, had dreams of becoming one day like a conflict photographer, like a war photographer, and obviously a lot of war photographers who came before would do a fair amount of protest photography. Okay, it's a great way of getting a feel for complex and difficult situations and how you're going to respond to them personally as a photographer. Way back in 1848, I begin with the Chartists. For context, the Chartist aims to seek by every legal means to place all classes of society in possession of their equal political and social rights. Essentially, the Chartists are a working class movement trying to secure better working rights through political reform for men only, not for women. That wasn't in their remit, and wow, can you imagine? What you are now looking at is a rare daguerreotype of the Chartist meeting held at Kennington Common in London in 1848. The Chartists were attempting to present a petition to Parliament. The government were paranoid about a revolution, so they filled London with 85,000 special constables with 8,000 soldiers for backup, and of course it was a peaceful protest. And to me, this kind of wide landscape shot is the documentary photograph as evidence. It's showing the scale of the event. And, you know, to this day, often media shy away from often showing these very large-scale crowd shots. Probably the most basic photograph you can make is the image of a protester with a placard. But this one from 1855 has become elevated by its age and its context. It's a photograph of Anne Knight taken by Victor Franc. Her placard reads, "By tortured millions, by the divine Redeemer, enfranchise humanity, bid the outraged world be free." Anne Knight was a Quaker who was an advocate for the abolition of slavery, and again, controversially for the time, even to go as far as to say that the slave owners should not be compensated for loss of money when they lose their slaves. I mean, you say this now in the 21st century and it sounds crazy, but again, it's just amazing that we do have this image of Anne. There she is, there's the placard, you know, it's amazing. Sir Oswald Ernald Mosley was a British politician who rose to fame in the 1920s as a Member of Parliament and later in the 30s became the leader of the British Union of Fascists. After his election failure in 1931, Mosley went on to study fascism basically, went and hung out under Mussolini and returned convinced that it was the way forward for Britain. He wanted to unite the fascist movements in the UK and create the British Union of Fascists. In October 1936, Mosley and the British Union of Fascists attempted to march for a predominantly Jewish area of East London. Violence resulted between local and nationally organised protesters trying to block the march, and police trying to force it through. It's come to be known as the Battle of Cable Street. The chant, "They shall not pass," will always be connected to that day and the Battle of Cable Street when they stopped the fascists, but it makes me think of another guy too. Like all scumbags, Mosley seemed to live forever, finally popping his clogs in 1980 at the ripe old age of 84. This is video footage of him still being platformed by a major channel in the UK in 1975. In 1965, 300 civil rights demonstrators began a march from Selma, Alabama to the state capital of Montgomery to confront local institutions which obstructed African Americans from registering to vote. 3 days later, their number had swelled to more than 25,000 as they gathered at the state capitol building to listen to a speech given by Martin Luther King Jr. and deliver a petition to the segregationist governor George Wallace. The photographer Bruce Davison was there and captured the whole thing.
That young man, who I haven't been able to find, it was his idea to put vote on his head. And it was a very powerful image. It was also a very dangerous image for him because the National Guard was alongside. They were in the woods waiting for anything to happen. And they couldn't be trusted. The police couldn't be trusted. So he was showing off that which the whole march was really about. And he survived, and the image survived.
1968, what a year for protest, okay? And the one I want to bring up now is the protests in Paris, okay? They started with student protests as occupations that were against consumerism, capitalism, and American imperialism. Because of the protests, the economy of France came to a halt. The protests got so out of control that political leaders feared civil war or even a revolution. The government briefly ceased to function after President Charles de Gaulle secretly fled from France to Germany. The protests spurred movements worldwide with songs, imaginative graffiti, posters and slogans. Many of the protests of 1968 were also tied to the Viet Nam War, which was continuing to rage. I'm going to show you some war photography from Vietnam, as some of these photographs became instrumental in the ending of the Vietnam War by swinging public opinion against the conflict. The Vietnam War was a long, costly and divisive conflict that pitted the communist government of North Vietnam against South Vietnam and its principal ally, the United States. The conflict was intensified by the ongoing Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. More than 3 million people, including over 58,000 Americans, were killed in the Vietnam War, and more than half of the dead were Vietnamese civilians. And there were loads of amazing photographers there. I won't cover everyone, but I'll cover 2 iconic photographs and one person who created a significant body of work that would become an iconic photo book. This is a photograph by Eddie Adams, and it was the execution of a Vietnamese soldier called Nguyen Van Lem. And it was quite a shocking photograph for the world to see. It was a cold-blooded execution, and it really did swing a lot of public opinion against the Vietnam War. One thing that's interesting about the photograph is it seems what came to light was although it looks like a civilian who's being executed, it was actually a Vietnamese soldier who was part of a hit squad who'd been responsible for the murders of many people, including women and children. So again, it's just this sort of horrible image of conflict that, it helped to stop the war, but at the same time, it's just all terrible. This photograph is by Nick Ut, and it became called Napalm Girl. The girl at the front, her name was Kim Phuc Van Thi, and she was 9 years old in it, and her clothes had been burned off by napalm. And it's one of the most kind of instrumental photographs helping to end the Vietnam War. It was made and became a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph, and it's an absolutely horrific image. And you can see why it was so instrumental in capturing people's real true sense of horror. One thing that I always found really weird was that the photograph also captures another war photographer on the right of frame who's in the middle of loading his 35mm film camera and kind of missing all of these images. And it's almost like a weird, bad photographic joke that he should then be immortalised in the most iconic photograph made in the entire Vietnam War. First published in 1971, Vietnam Inc. was crucial in changing public attitudes in the United States, turning the tide of opinion and ultimately helping to put an end to the Vietnam War. Phillip Jones Griffiths' classic account of the war was the outcome of 3 years reporting and is one of the most detailed surveys of any conflict. Showing us the true horrors of the war as well as a study of Vietnamese rural life, the author creates a compelling argument against the dehumanising power of the modern war machine and against American imperialism. So this is a pretty wild story. Again, I'm like 90% sure it's true, but there's a photograph in Vietnam Inc. of a Vietnamese soldier kind of holding his stomach because he's got a stomach wound. And there's like a soldier or a captain or someone, lieutenant, reaching down and offering him some water. Okay, now, does that sound familiar to you?
This man's hurt pretty bad, sir. About the only thing that's holding his guts in, sir, is that pot lid.
Yeah? What do you have to say?
This soldier is dirty busy. He wants water. He can drink patty water.
Get out of here! Give me that canteen. Any man brave enough to get out of here! Get your f***ing ass!
We're killing a lot of our people.
Any man brave enough to... Why would his guts strapped on and could drink from my canteen any day?
Hey, Colonel!
I think one of those sailors, Lance Johnson, the surfer. Wait, hey, sure.
Philip Jones Griffiths saw Apocalypse Now, and he looked at it and thought, wait a minute, that seems awfully familiar. So later on, he was at some event and saw Francis Ford Coppola and said, hey, I'm glad I helped you. I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember what it was. It was something like, hey, I recognise that, or I helped you with your movie or whatever, or it was some maybe a bit more acerbic because it was Philip Jones Griffiths. And I think Francis Ford Coppola just told him to basically. While the Viet Nam War was raging, there were massive protests in America and the world over. It may seem unthinkable now, but on May 4th, 1970, 4 Kent State University students were killed and 9 were injured when members of the Ohio National Guard opened fire during a demonstration protesting the Viet Nam War at the university. It was such a devastating moment that echoed throughout the culture. Neil Young would write the song Ohio in dedication to those who lost